suppose when you talk about racism in an Irish context, Irish society doesn't see itself as being a racist society or prejudiced. Yet, when you hear of what's happening in the likes of South Africa and other places like that, we condemn them, and rightly so. I fully agree, we should condemn them. But what's the use of condemning what's happening 10,000 miles away, because it's extremely easy, and yet what's happening on our own doorstep, there's damn all done about it.
There are approximately 20,000 travellers living in Ireland today. In recent years, the majority of them have been forced into an urban situation. They live in deplorable conditions. Their infant mortality is 3 times that of the general population. 95% of them will die before their 55th birthday.
The majority of travellers are living in very primitive conditions. Conditions such as no running water, electricity, toilets, refuse collection, etc. And these are conditions that travellers are forced to live in. A lot of people have the assumption that these are conditions and these are circumstances that travellers prefer to live in. That is not the case. Travellers are forced to live in these conditions.
Dublin, vibrant capital of a modern European nation. A city with memories of colonial oppression. A city where there is a very personal sense of solidarity with the third world. The average Irish person, racism is something that happens abroad. Racism does not necessarily depend on colour of skin. A reality that the Irish discovered to their cost when seeking work and accommodation in Britain. They were confronted by signs stating, "No Irish need apply." The British expected the Irish to behave in certain stereotypical ways, to be violent, stupid and drunk. If we expect travellers to be dirty, parasitic and incompetent, we too are guilty of racism.
I know we'd do everything we could to get rid of them. It'd be hard, but like, even if we had to burn them outside, it wouldn't be too good because we live in a nice area.
Different area, they have the litter. You can't get down, you couldn't walk up the road late at night near them. There's no way. I know you can't go anywhere, but I mean, there's no way you could walk up past them. They have absolutely ruined Tala.
It is these children and their families who inspire such hatred from the general population. Their teacher, Nell MacDonagh, is also a traveller. She would like to see the next generation growing up free from discrimination.
We want to be recognised as an ethnic minority by the settled community. We want to be able to live our lives and rear our children as travellers, to allow them to be proud of being travellers. And we can't do this if people won't accept us as travellers. Majority of settled people accept us as a sub, kind of poor settled people, as people who are dropouts from society. We're not. We ourselves see us as an ethnic minority, and we want people and the state to recognise us as such.
There's a lot of discrimination against travellers. And what I can't figure out is some settled, I'm not saying all settled people are like this, but most of them hate travellers. And what I can't figure out is they don't know us enough to hate us. How can they hate a person just without even knowing them, without even talking to them? I just can't figure out that. I just don't understand why it has to be like that.
Nothing much has changed for the travellers since I was a child, because as a matter of fact I think things has got worse for travellers. They were always bad, hard times for our travellers, but today things has got worse, because the camps we used to stay in years ago, we could go around. If we didn't like one camp, we could move to another camp. Travellers that time had barrel-top wagons, and more of them had tents. You know, the poor travellers just had tents and a bit of straw.
In popular mythology, the traveller of yore was a welcome visitor to the rural community. Respected for his craftsmanship, he was synonymous with the single trade of tinsmithing. Today's traveller is seen as a parasite, out of sync with the modern world. It is a common belief that since tin has been replaced by plastic, the traveller has been made redundant. In fact, the traveller's economic base is nothing like so simple or so limited. Indeed, it stresses the individual's ability to turn his hand to anything. In the past, tinsmithing was only one particularly characteristic way of making a living. Part of a repertoire including seasonal agricultural work, hawking, chimney sweeping, horse dealing, fortune-telling, and more. Travellers make their living by filling whatever occasional demands arise from the settled population and move on when the job is done. All over the world, there are travelling people performing such services for the sedentary population. The best-known group, the Gypsies, are simply travelling people of Indian origin, who began to arrive in Europe about 500 years ago.
There's lots of theories and stuff like that about where travellers come from, and some of them are grand and nice. Like, I mean, have theories like travellers are pre-Celtic people, and it's very hard to prove all that, but they have been around a long time. The settled people's perception of them is that they have come from the famine, which is not true. Maybe some people did stay on the road after the famine, but travellers existed long before that. Like, even in the states, in the southern states, South Carolina and Georgia, you have lots of Irish travellers today. A fairly large contingent of Irish travellers that went there at the time of the famine. So they existed long before the famine, if they went there as travelling people, and still like that today. Travellers in the past would have spoken their own language among themselves and used it in everyday conversation, and it would have been a normal thing for them to use. Today, sadly enough, as I said earlier on, they don't use it as much now, which is very sad, and the young people are really missing out on it, because the language, I feel, is very, very important, and it helps people to preserve and keep their identity as a people. They call it cant. Now, there's other names, gammon, shelter. People, they'll be very surprised when you tell them, look, the travelling people speak their own language, and they say, God, like, you know, the perceptions of travellers has been a very sort of completely illiterate people that don't really understand anything, and then you come along and you find these people that actually have their own language and they speak their own language. It's a very old language, really very old. It's very Gaelic sounding. It's not actually Gaelic. Like, if you're a very good Gaelic speaker, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to understand it. Like, if you were a very good Gaelic speaker and I said, you need ish granny and minkras lubby a Tory, like, you were lost on it. And all that meant was that you didn't understand what it just says.
The settled population understands virtually nothing about travellers, except that they are different and therefore threatening. Centuries before the Gypsies arrived in Europe, legislation was already being passed in these islands aimed at controlling travellers. This constant theme of persecution is today expressed in official harassment, evictions, lack of provision, and even the deliberate destruction of campsites. Throughout their lives, travellers endure state-imposed segregation in schooling and in social welfare.
In our institutions, such as the social welfare system, where at the moment travellers having to sign on, and have been in years having to sign on at Thursday mornings at 11:30 for travellers only, nationwide, but north and south of the border. I mean, that is a very obvious example of institutional racism, where it's actually enshrined into our laws. You know, where it actually says this: travellers must sign on such a time, such a day at such a place. I mean, I find that very hard to accept, and in a lot of ways it would be similar to apartheid in South Africa, and we often refer to it as apartheid Irish style.
A Dublin dole office, Thursday morning. Both north and south of the border, all travellers in receipt of unemployment benefits must sign on at this time. The unspoken but obvious reasoning behind this is that given the opportunity, travellers would abuse the system. Even families who have been in standard council housing for decades are still obliged to travel to this single central exchange. Another traveller-only office handles social welfare claims. Getting into these segregated facilities entails long journeys past the local offices used by their settled neighbours.
What do you think is apartheid and discrimination in this country against travelling people? But this happens all over. It's not the labour exchange, it's the pubs, clubs, anywhere travelling people goes in this country. It's the same crack. Sorry, we can't serve you people. That's the rule. That's their rule. Well, who made that rule is wrong.
A lot of local authorities have what we often refer to as the boulder policy. What in actual fact that means that if you're in a camping spot and when you're evicted, probably the next day or the day after, but not too long after anyway, that camping spot would be, there would be boulders. If not, there would be mountains of clay.
They have rolled in the boulders and dug trenches everywhere. Stone circles round our halting sites. You're not stopping there. There's big boulders up in Belfast, and there's boulders down in Clare. There's boulders outside Mullingar and all around Sweet Kildare.
It has become virtually impossible with the boulders, with the clay, with harassment, evictions. I mean, it is virtually almost, impossible to retain that nomadic way of life.
Today on the Glen Road, travellers are living up on top of each other. The travellers have always been loners, and like government or county councillors or people like that has never done research into travellers. The travellers are an ethnic group. They're different than the settled people. They have a different way of life, a different culture, a different language. They've always been loners. When I was growing up, you would find maybe at the highest 2 or 3 families, 4 families would stay together. But here in the Glen Road, it's like a slum. You give slums for settled people. Well, this could be a slum for travellers because you have 40 families here, and then up a bit further you have 20 families, and they're all just piled in on top of each other. And there's so many teenagers and so many children, and down through the years the travellers are camping here. There's no toilets or no way of having a bath. It's just like in a third world.
One of the peculiarities of prejudice is that the individual can comfortably hold mutually contradictory beliefs. Alongside the stereotype of travellers as shiftless, helpless parasites, there is also the conviction that they are enviably wealthy.
Coming around from house to house looking for money, and if you look at the camping site, like any of their sites, they're all driving around in brand new cars. Like you wonder what they're going around looking for money, and only people going around looking for money, and clothes and everything. And they go around wearing gold jewellery as well. Like that's said it fairly well.
What the settled observer does not understand is that what he sees has a different meaning for the traveller. Gold jewellery is preferred to the banks as a way of saving.
One of the perceptions of travellers is that they're extremely wealthy. Now, within the traveller population there is a small, and I mean a really small number of them, that would be wealthy people. Like, because they're travellers, it goes across all the class barriers, but yet they don't fit into any of the class barriers in a sense. But travellers, there's very little number of travellers, very small numbers that would be extremely wealthy. The rest are not. The perception is that, God, look at them there, look, driving around in nice high-ace vans and flying around, they must have plenty of money. But it's not really, because when a young couple get married, one of their sort of aims and ambitions is to acquire a van. because with that comes sort of an independence. So they can get water, where most of the camps are at, there's no water, so they have to get the water in some way. Firewood, and probably collect small scrap or whatever it is, like, you know, whatever they're going to do with the van. But it gives them that independence. To get the van, we'll say most travellers get it on, we'll say, on a loan, and they pay off on a monthly basis and pay back the van. And that's how most of them actually survive. The van is not a sign of wealth. It's actually in some cases a sign of poverty for a lot of them, because they're stuck in paying back on a monthly basis for it. And that's how most travellers get it. And most people think that they go in and walk in and hand down this wad of notes and buy out this van. It's actually the opposite. They go in and they get a loan and buy the van and pay it off. So that's the way most travellers operate.
Well, they put themselves out an awful lot to cause trouble, and you're living around them. There seems to be always trouble in following them. That's what I think of them.
In what way, trouble?
Well, they seem to be always knocking on your door, or there's always rows, or they're always drinking on the side of their road, or don't want to work.
Lots of travellers are looked at as if they're very violent people. They're not any more violent or any more incensed than anyone else, and that they're very heavy drinkers. And really it's surprising the amount of travellers that actually don't drink, that don't drink at all. But it's just because that lots of these things are seen in the open. Like with travellers, most travellers are not allowed into pubs. Like a large group of travellers would never get into a pub. So if they're doing any of their drinking, which if they're celebrating something that and there's a gathering or something like that, it's normally done outside and open to the public, where most of the other drinking is done in behind closed doors. It's not seen so much, and it's only what people see of them, so immediately you have this perception of travellers that they're all into this heavy drinking, so which is not true. The other side where you say travellers are very violent people, because again travellers live in the open, they're seeing warts and all. So if there is an argument or if there is a dispute, even a family dispute, that's seen in the open and it's open to everybody to see. So they assume and that they are very violent people, which is not really true.
Oh, well, I was a tinsmith making buckets and pans, very well known for my quart-gallon cans. But this plastic that's here now has finished our thread. We'll have to find new ways of making some bread. These days we live in, the traveller can't win. There's nowhere to stop or to care for a kin. I'm asking the people to leave us alone. Let the travellers find a life in their own.
We visited 3 Dublin pubs one August evening with a group of 6 travellers. They were refused service in all of them. We returned to challenge the management in one, and after some discussion, and perhaps due to the presence of the camera, were eventually served. Even so, they still could not enjoy a quiet drink.
Let me tell us where you're from. You fellas.
Football team.
You like to think you wild people discriminated against.
We are being discriminated.
You're
It's a reality. We are discriminated.
That's how you behave and how you're discriminated against.
I behave as good as any man, but I never got any
How you
education.
behave.
But I do behave myself. I never caused someone out of where I go.
What?
I never caused
I
someone
live in
out
the
of
country. England men. They don't know what half the one of you fellas did around my area.
What
And what do you discriminate against?
What do we do?
You want blackguard blood and everything, robbing everything.
That's the state.
You are not honourable people.
That's the state.
When they returned to challenge the management in another of the pubs, the owner threatened to call the police.
That's very unfair to me. That's no way to...
Do you not think it's quite unfair to these people that...
Conclusions, sir. You're jumping to conclusions. You're drawing conclusions that aren't...
Is it conclusion that you will not serve?
Sorry, gentlemen, you'll have to leave.
Conclusion that you won't serve?
I'll have to... Sorry, gentlemen. You'll have to leave. Are you leaving the premises? Are you leaving? Sorry, my colleague.
They were always served here.
Gentlemen, please. You'll have to...
Just one simple question. Saudi and South Africa are apartheid and discrimination. We think it's apartheid against travelling people.
I don't have to answer any questions in my own house. Now, please, out.
2 weeks ago we were playing the itinerants up in Patricia College in a friendly match between people from the Cardiff Inn. And we had a friendly match together of a Sunday morning, and we came in here together at 12:30, and we all came in here having a drink after the matches, and we all sat down, right, and the Italians went up to ask for a drink, and they were all barred. So each individual player of the football team said to himself, right, these blokes, ain't nothing wrong with them, like any other individual, they have not caused any trouble, and this is a bit, we felt it was discrimination against them.
When you talk about the whole thing of prejudice and what happens in Ireland, like there's a fierce amount of prejudice and racism against travelling people. And one sort of incident that happened really bothered me a lot, sort of highlighted it in a big way for me, was that this situation where this young travelling boy, was getting on the bus to go to school one day. The bus brought the children up and down to school, and he was told no, he couldn't get on the bus. And this really lad hadn't a clue why not, but he just couldn't get to walk to school. And all the rest of his pals were on the bus heading off to school. So when I heard about it, I went up to find out what was going on. So I talked to a wee lad, he told us what happened, so I got in contact with the bus driver, the whole lot, like, you know, to find out why, in the name of God, were they going to stop a young travelling lad getting on the bus. Like, the same system operates in other areas where you have whites only in South Africa on the buses. We weren't going to have that in here, in Ireland. But what happened was the residents had objected to the child getting on the bus, and they weren't allowing their children to travel on the same bus as travelling children. And they told the bus driver that they would withdraw their business if he allowed travelling children on the bus.
Was the traveller child living in that area not also a resident? New housing estates are mushrooming around our cities. Many are built over traditional campsites. The travellers were there long before the residents arrived. A nomadic people's lands are being gobbled up by settlers who push them to the side. There is nothing uniquely Irish about this, and the travellers themselves know it.
Panty shields and intimate wipes for freshness all day, every day. Every day.
There's a place in Belfast that can touch your eyes, your ears, your mind, your heart in a way that words or pictures can never convey, bringing you celebrities from all over the world with laughter, music, passion, drama, tears. Grand Opera House. Be there.
This is a contest between the two leading fabric conditioners.
The family is the most important thing for travelling people. Times like funerals or weddings, when people say, oh, like, who is coming to the wedding, is all your family coming, you say, yeah, and then you might be, people stand back and look in amazement for maybe 600 or 700 people turn up at a wedding, because this is your family. You never just take it the nuclear family of a man and woman and the 2 or 3 children. It has absolutely no meaning to travellers. When we speak of family, we speak of all of our family, and the extended family being some extended families have up to 400, 500, 600 people in them, or more, 1,000 people. Our family will be made up mainly of names such as MacDonagh and Joyce, Nevin, Riley, and Collins, and Stokes, really. That would be our names. Then you would have, you know, other family groups like the Connors, the Cash, the Delaney's, and the Morehouse. That would be their family group. There's names. As soon as you would say your name, people would know what family group to associate you with. There's a very, very high moral code among travelling people. You know, settled people get the impression that when they come to a campsite, see all the caravans so close together and all the people living in such a small area. I often was asked, you know, God, does it matter who you live with or who you stay with in the caravan? It's the complete opposite. Will be very, very high moral code. Again, once the girl is an adult, from about the age of 12, she wouldn't even be allowed to the local shop by herself. They're chaperoned everywhere they go. You'd never ever see a travelling girl walking down the town by herself. There's always somebody with her. Settled people kind of say, oh, look at the travelling people, they have big families and they're very dirty and they neglect their children. It's very easy for a woman that has access to showers and baths and toilet facilities and hot water and access to all the comforts of life that settled people would take for granted. But when you think of a woman with a big crowd of children in a small caravan with maybe 2 cans of water to do her all day, it's, you know, okay, she might appear, the kids might have dirty faces, but that woman is probably wrecked and probably shattered all day trying to keep that family together and keep those children. So it's okay for people to talk, but they should really question how, if I haven't got access to running water, how am I going to keep the children's faces clean and keep the area around me clean?
If there is going to be any improvement in the situation, we need travellers out there as leaders. We need travellers being articulate on the media. We need travellers to protest. We need travellers to organise themselves. And we feel education can facilitate that to a great extent. And that's why we feel it's important. If this whole situation is to improve, which is one of oppression, discrimination, bad living conditions, if that's to improve, then we need travellers availing of the educational system.
The question of education is not so simple as it might at first appear. The system makes no provision for nomadic children who may find it impossible to get into any sort of classroom. But what awaits those travelling children who do get in? Most will automatically be placed into segregated all-traveller classes. While these officially exist in order to meet travelling children's unique needs, in fact, the teachers have no special training about travellers and their culture. Many emerge, 9 years later, unable to read and write.
I have a big girl here, my daughter Nina, and I had her at school here. She was going to St. Paul's School, that's up on the Falls Road. And it's just an old traveller school, which is I disapprove of. Like, in my opinion, when a school is built for children, does one child know better than another child? All children are the same, so they should be treated the same. So in my opinion, there shouldn't be such thing as an old traveller school. Children should be allowed mix with settled children. Children should be allowed to play together.
There's new schools built for settled children, and you have a class around the back, hidden around the back, for travelling children. And this class at playtime, the settled children get out first, they're taken in, and then the little travelling children are let out to play. Now, what do you call that? That's racist, it's discrimination.
When I was living in Uri, I started at a school called St. Joseph's, and I started off in P5 in it. The beginning of it, I really didn't like it because I was on my own, if you know what I mean. I had no friends. But then the kids, they started mixing with me, and I made a lot of friends in it. At P5, I didn't do very well because I didn't know A from B, to be quite honest with you. But then I stayed in P5 for, I think it was a school term. I went to P6, P7. And that kind of school really sort of push you, like, to make you learn the things. Whereas I went to another school in Belfast, we're all travelling kids, and you just, if you didn't know how to do it, that was it. They wouldn't push you or anything. And to me, the school in Europe was a lot better.
We would like to see something introduced into the teacher training, whereby that if a teacher comes into a classroom environment, that they can actually teach something about travellers' history, culture and values, so that the travellers are benefiting from it, and also the settled people are benefiting from it, and thus reinforcing the traveller into traveller. Because at the moment, I mean, a lot of travellers are quite sceptical about themselves, and they're not aware of their history, customs, values, traditions, and we feel that the educational system could facilitate that in terms of reinforcing the self-esteem in the travellers, which is very low at the moment, and also in terms of facilitating travellers in becoming leaders. We feel it's very important.
The school may fail to do what the traveller parents expect of it, that is, to impart the 3 R's. It may also, consciously or not, exert a great deal of cultural pressure on the child to conform to normal, that is, settled patterns. Meanwhile, each day that the travelling child spends in school is a day spent away from the education he would have had he stayed at home. We must not make the mistake of treating education as synonymous with schooling. Like the traditional rural family, the traveller family is a working unit in which the children learn essential skills by watching and copying adults.
Travellers are very patriarchal, and that the young lad starts to work with the father. He learns how to survive, how to get scrap, how to live, and how to survive within the whole society that can be very oppressive. That type of education is learned at home, that's not learned at the school. So to send the children to school, which I think is important, and I'm not saying don't send children to school. I remember talking to a group of travellers a while back, we're just discussing here, we were all talking about different things, and one of them says to me, "Och, Michael, if I send him to school, he's going to get soft." I said, "Yeah, what does he mean by this, like, you know?" And we talked about it, and what he meant was that to send him to school, he's not going to be able to survive when he comes out of the school within the way travellers live, and the way travellers earn their living, the way travellers get on. Now, to say that doesn't mean that by settled children going to school that's making them soft. It's not. They're going to get educated into a lifestyle and into a way of making a living that suits them. But the travellers are not going to get that. So you have to introduce that side of it. Now, he was maintaining that he could show that young lad how to do this and how to do that the way he was showed. And to lose that, I think, would be disastrous for travellers. I think that's a very important aspect of traveller lifestyle and the way they survive.
The education we learned when we were children, it wasn't important to read and write. Reading and writing wasn't important. The most important thing of our education was our religion. We learned that from word of mouth. It's tough in school for children. They're not learning like the settled children because it's too tough for them in school. They have so much to put up with in school. They get called dirty knackers, they're humiliated in school. A lot of them is out at different playtimes, and they come home and they have complaints and they have problems in school, and they almost beg you not to send them to school. They plead with you not to send them to school, because how can the children learn in school if this is going on? I'll tell you a little poem now. Buffer means, moshe means gosh, or oh, or please, you know, and buffer means settled person. So this is a little poem I wrote. This is what she said to me one day. She left the travellers preschool and then she went into the settled school, and she didn't have a child to play with, and she was feeling very, very down, and she was feeling really depressed. The child was feeling really depressed. So I just sat down thinking about it in my mind, and I wrote this little poem. This is what she says to me. Musha, mammy, don't send me to school. Please don't send me to school. Mammy, to treat me like a fool. They stand around and call me names, and in their heart, I'm not the same. I'll wash the dishes, I'll clean the floor, I'll mind the babies, and a whole lot more. Please leave me home where I belong. Not in this school, they're not my clan. I'm only one traveller to 29. Silly buffers, they're not my kind. Leave me alone where I belong. Not in this school, they're not my clan.
The settled community sees so little of the traveller way of life. Brief glimpses through rolled-up windows. And what little it does see, it misinterprets. When we see caravans surrounded by scrapped cars and festering rubbish, we never bother to ask why, because we're so sure we know already. Travellers have little or no control over their living conditions. Their homes, on the other hand, are their own, and perhaps to make up for the surrounding squalor, are havens of order, cleanliness, beauty, and warmth. Traveller homes shine. How many settled people, including government officials and planners, ever see the inside of a traveller home, or get to know the people themselves? Whatever the current official line, policies towards travellers remain unchanged. Travellers are seen as deviant or failed settled people, to be reintegrated, or failing that, swept aside. Travelling people are seen not as people, but as a problem, the itinerant problem.
And if you're forced to live in conditions that have no refuse collection, no sanitary service, no water, no electricity, obviously your health is going to be affected.
Due to the fact, like, of the muck and the dirt, like, they gathered up through the wet winters, we had to stone all this place, hardcore it, and anything firm like that we could get our hands on to put on the ground, we had to do it. But in the winter time, like, it is a danger now because of the stones, because when the water run underneath the stones, you've got all sort of dishwater and wash water and everything else that's been thrown out. And that's all lodging underneath the stones. No matter how much you disinfect it, there's still germs underneath that. There is a high risk of health problems in a site that hasn't got the proper water, running water and toilet facilities.
The conditions here are really awful because the things you would find in a third world, you would find them here, like children with chest infections, gastroenteritis, diarrhea and kidney infections, all kinds of things. And then there's a very high level of lead here, and where children would get the brain damage out of lead, everyone knows that. But it's just because they're travelling children, they're allowed to live like that. And like, if settled people had to live like us, there would be an outcry. Because if you're living in a house, if your bin collection stops for a week, like, there's all kinds of talk and upset about it, or say a toilet is blocked in a house, there's someone out straight away to fix it because it's a cause of sickness and disease. Settled people pass here and they look in at the dirt. It's the dirt they look at. Like, I know it's hard for the people across the road to look at the dirt, you know, and to look at the way the travellers has to live. But can they imagine the way it is for travellers that has to live in it?
These caravans, they're just made like aluminium and sort of a bit of plywood stuck together. When they're making them, they put plastic air vents into them. And the plastic air vents are always and ever on the floor of the caravan. You'll never get them in a high up place. They're always on the floor. So I was here one evening and I was watching my TV, and I heard this plumpy sound inside in the oven. And I just got up, turned the TV down. Next thing was I sat real quiet waiting to see like what was the noise that I was after hearing. Was it going to happen again? I knew it was a strange noise, like, and there was nobody in the caravan but me, for I was wondering where the noise came out of. Here I hears the noise again when I opened the oven door. There was a big rat actually in the oven, trying to get a chicken that I had roasted earlier that day down through the burner part of the oven. See, what happened was the rat ate its way up through the plastic ventilator that was on the floor, ate its way up through that,
This site in Belfast is an unofficial, which is to say illegal, site, home to 40 families for the past 20 years. There are no toilets, no bin collection, no washing facilities, and no lighting. There are 3 cold water taps dangerously close to a busy main road. The families have to supply their own electricity with petrol-powered generators. There is nowhere for children to play. This site in Dublin is an official site, planned and provided by local authorities, home to 60 families. There are no washing facilities or lighting. A single toilet and a skip, emptied irregularly, are the only facilities provided. The families have to supply their own electricity with petrol-powered generators. There is nowhere for children to play. Travellers are invariably isolated from the settled community. This site in Newry, a town just north of the border, is surrounded on 3 sides by water and encircled by a high wall. It can only be reached by a narrow causeway. Another site in Dublin is encircled by massive earthworks, hiding it from the nearby road. Settled people, including the settled people who make the policies, see travellers as a problem to be solved. They develop plans with the advice of settled experts, not in consultation with travellers. Vast sums have been poured into projects that were doomed from the start. These chalets, the travellers more accurately call them huts, are still being built on the grounds that travellers couldn't make the leap from caravans to standard housing. These are much smaller than the average local authority dwelling, despite the average traveller family being much larger. Physical isolation means no access to bus routes, shops, and telephones. In an emergency, residents may have to walk miles before they find a public telephone that they will be allowed to use. Firefighting equipment is non-existent or inoperative. Several children have been burned to death in recent, separate incidents. The conditions that travellers are forced to live in are not only completely unsuited to their needs, policies are deliberately geared towards controlling and curtailing the traveller lifestyle. The extended, not the nuclear family, is the basic unit of traveller society, yet chalets are built with minimal interspacing, precisely in order to prevent visiting relatives from parking caravans.
They never provided a place for the scrap. So they just want them in to hang around all day, be bored to death, just like people, I suppose, in houses, bored to death hanging around. They never thought of giving them a little corner behind a wall, just keeping them occupied. When you ask them, like, you say, well, what about the travellers and a bit of scrap and a bit of tampering about, and what are you going to do about that? Are you going to give them a place? Oh, we're not here for providing industries for scrap. We're here to provide housing schemes. So then what happens to travellers? They get up, they move along, they get to the side of the road, there maybe is a bit of space there, and they can throw their scrap there. Then the settlers comes along and say, oh, look at the dirt at the side of the road, look at the state of the side of the road, we want them out of there. Look at the scrap they've in the side of the road. Then they move them on somewhere else, right? They move to another place, and the same thing happens in that area. So that's what goes around. And then when you want to have a talk with them and trying to sort things out, you know, they're just not prepared to listen. If they only could listen to the travellers, it would solve an awful lot of problems.
Travellers, the people who live on these sites, know exactly what their needs and problems are, but are deliberately excluded from decision-making Outsiders guess instead of simply listening. The residents of one Dublin site, Oliver's Park in Clondalkin, tried for over a year to participate in planning for refurbishing the site. No one would listen. A sympathetic architect surveyed it for them and helped them construct a scale model of the changes they wanted. Standard-size houses with gardens in front, work and parking space at the back, green spaces, a community centre, children's playground, public telephone, proper lighting. The corporation has accepted the plan, and work will begin soon. The first travellers' site anywhere, planned by the residents themselves. Another traveller who fought for appropriate accommodation was Chrissy Ward, whose 7-year fight for group housing is about to bear fruit. These modern bungalows are being constructed for her and her family. Even so, the same old attitudes prevail.
We asked them to consult us in building those because we were going to be there for life anyhow, because we're not going anywhere, because we haven't travelled anywhere in years because of the children going to school, because I don't want to deprive them of what I was deprived in myself. So we were all delighted, we're all excited to get into them. Every woman is. We're talking about what we're going to do, but this, you know, this is the only prop, the only complaint I think we have is this wall. Because going from the window now, even if you stand in and look out the window, you can't see anything else but the wall. If you look that way, there's a wall, and you look behind, there's a wall, and you look the front, there's a wall. And I don't think to have to hide us from the people in the area. We wanted a large window where we could, if you look at the caravan out at the moment, you won't see a window, a curtain in that window. You won't see a curtain in that window. Because they were reared in tents, like out in the air. It's a different way of life. You're kind of smothered in. But then we want a little bit of garden. I know people seem to think we want too much, that we want this, we want that. But if you look at every other community in Dublin, they have football fields, they have gardens and so on for the children, but not Hulls. I don't think it's important to give that to Hulls.
I suppose over the years there have been many changes, some for the good and some for the bad, but I think the way forward for travellers is going to entail an awful lot more changes. I think first and foremost, the way forward for travellers, what travellers really feel that they want is that they want to be identified and accepted for what they are.
If the government and society were to recognise travellers as an ethnic group, it would give us status. At the moment, we have no status in society.
I think people have to understand that there is an awful amount of prejudice and racism against travelling people. And Irish people have to start to find that they are racist in that sense against travelling people. And the sooner that they identify that, then I think something more constructive can be done about it.
I'm a traveller. People say travellers don't like beauty. They don't love lovely trees and lovely flowers and nice things. Of course we do. Whereas you go out and you march together and you say, we want this. We want the better life. Like we want the place where the lilac trees grow.
Oh, it's well that I remember that dark and cold December, when the lawmen came to move us on along that lonely road. But they did not stop to ask us why or where we were going. I remember my poor mother, she was carrying a heavy load. All we look for is our dignity